In the heart of ancient Israel, amidst a time of moral chaos and rampant idolatry, one man rose as a defiant voice of unwavering faith, a prophet whose very name sends shivers through the pages of history: Elijah. Imagine a world where the heavens respond to the cries of a lone figure, where fire descends from the sky at his command, and where miracles breathe life into the hopeless. Elijah's story is not just a narrative of ancient times. It's a testament to the extraordinary power of faith and divine intervention. From summoning heavenly fire to consume a water-drenched sacrifice in a jaw-dropping display of God's supremacy over Baal, to multiplying a widow's oil and resurrecting her son, Elijah's life was a symphony of miracles. Each act reaffirmed his prophetic authority and reignited the flame of true worship in the hearts of the Israelites. His unshakable belief made him a beacon of hope in a time of despair, a living testament to the boundless possibilities when faith meets divine power. But Elijah's story is more than history, it's an invitation. It beckons us to reflect on the power of belief in our own lives, to recognize the divine fingerprints in our everyday moments, and to dare to believe in the miraculous. As we delve into the life of this extraordinary prophet, we are reminded that the same divine force that ignited his path continues to work in ways both grand and subtle, waiting to transform our lives if only we believe. Elijah's confrontation with King Ahab regarding the drought is one of the most dramatic and significant moments in the biblical narrative. The story takes place during a time of deep spiritual crisis in ancient Israel. King Ahab, heavily influenced by his wife Jezebel, led the nation away from the worship of the one true God and into the idolatrous practices of worshiping Baal, the Canaanite god of rain, fertility, and agriculture. This shift wasn't merely a personal failing, but a national rebellion against God, dragging the entire kingdom into spiritual decay. In response to this widespread disobedience, God called Elijah to deliver a powerful and bold message. Elijah announced a devastating drought that would last for years, directly challenging the authority of Baal. In ancient cultures, rain was seen as a sign of divine blessing, and Baal was believed to control the rains. By declaring that no rain would fall except at his command, Elijah was demonstrating that the God of Israel alone held true power over nature and life itself. This confrontation was not without risk. King Ahab, supported by Jezebel, was known for ruthlessly persecuting prophets of God. By stepping into the royal court to deliver such a message, Elijah put his life on the line. His courage and obedience to God in the face of such danger highlighted his unwavering faith. Elijah's declaration was not just a prophecy, but a direct challenge to Ahab, Jezebel, and the spiritual complacency of the Israelites. It was a dramatic way of forcing the nation to confront the consequences of their idolatry. The drought, which lasted for 3.5 years, was devastating. Crops failed, water sources dried up, and the land became barren. This physical drought mirrored the spiritual drought in Israel, a nation that had turned its back on the God who had delivered them from slavery in Egypt and established them in the Promised Land. The drought served as both punishment and a wake-up call, reminding the Israelites that their reliance on Baal was futile and destructive. Elijah's role in this narrative also underscored the broader themes of prophetic ministry, to stand as a voice for God in a world that often rejected truth. He wasn't just delivering bad news. He was calling the nation back to repentance, urging them to abandon their idols and return to the worship of the one true God. His confrontation with Ahab was not just about a lack of rain. It was a declaration of spiritual war, a dramatic reminder of God's sovereignty, and an invitation to turn back from rebellion. This period in Israel's history, marked by political strife, spiritual corruption, and the growing influence of pagan practices, created the perfect backdrop for Elijah's bold message. His obedience and courage made him a pivotal figure, demonstrating what it means to trust in God fully, even when surrounded by adversity and opposition. Elijah's story continues to resonate as a powerful example of faith, courage, and the call to stand for truth, no matter the cost. During the drought, God sustained Elijah in truly extraordinary and miraculous ways. showcasing his boundless power and care for his faithful servant. After delivering the grim prophecy of the drought to King Ahab, Elijah was instructed by God to retreat and hide by the brook Cherith, a small waterway east of the Jordan River. This brook, though modest, became a lifeline for Elijah during a time when the rest of the land suffered from parched fields and dried-up rivers. It was here that Elijah experienced firsthand the sustaining power of God. In an astonishing act of divine provision, God commanded ravens, unclean birds by Israelite standards and typically known as scavengers, to bring Elijah food twice a day. Morning and evening, these unlikely messengers delivered bread and meat, ensuring that Elijah had enough to sustain himself. This miraculous care defied all logic and cultural expectations, serving as a vivid reminder that God can use the most improbable means to provide for his people. The ravens, creatures not typically associated with generosity, became instruments of God's incredible plan, reinforcing the truth that his provision knows no bounds. Elijah's time by the brook was not merely about physical survival, it was a profound spiritual journey. In the solitude of Cherith, surrounded by the barren landscape of a drought-stricken land, Elijah was taught to rely completely on God. The drying brook and the daily arrival of food reminded him that every resource and every need was under God's control. This experience of dependence on divine provision deepened Elijah's faith, teaching him that God's promises never fail, even in the direst of circumstances. Moreover, this period of isolation was not wasted. It was a season of preparation. Elijah's faith was being strengthened for the greater challenges that lay ahead, including his dramatic confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. By relying on God for every sip of water and every morsel of food, Elijah grew in trust and confidence, learning that God is the ultimate source of sustenance and strength. This remarkable episode also speaks to a timeless truth. God's provision often comes in ways we least expect, and his care for his people transcends the limits of human understanding. For modern believers, Elijah's story serves as a powerful reminder that even in seasons of drought, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, God's faithfulness remains steadfast. It is in these moments of dependency that we often draw closest to him, discovering that true sustenance and peace come from trusting in his unwavering provision. Elijah's experience by the brook Cherith continues to inspire faith and courage, encouraging believers to trust in God's ability to meet every need, no matter how insurmountable the circumstances may seem. Elijah's encounter with the widow of Zarephath is one of the most poignant and inspiring moments in the Bible, showcasing the power of faith and God's miraculous provision in times of utter despair. This encounter took place during the severe drought that Elijah had prophesied, which left much of the land in famine and desperation. Zarephath, a town in Sidon, was an unlikely destination for a prophet of Israel, as it lay in the heart of Baal worship territory. Yet, God sent Elijah there to demonstrate that his power and care extended beyond Israel's borders, even into the land of idol worship. When Elijah arrived, he found the widow gathering sticks to prepare a final meal for herself and her son. Their situation was dire. She had just enough flour and oil for one last meal before succumbing to starvation. Her hopelessness reflected the devastating impact of the drought, not only on the land but also on the people's spirits. Despite her dire circumstances, Elijah asked her for an extraordinary act of faith, to make him a small cake first, before preparing anything for herself or her son. To the widow, this request must have seemed impossible, even insensitive. Yet Elijah assured her with a bold promise from God. If she obeyed, her jar of flour and jug of oil would not run dry until the drought ended. The widow's decision to trust Elijah's words was a profound act of faith. In giving away what little she had, she placed her survival in God's hands. The outcome was nothing short of miraculous. Her supply of flour and oil became inexhaustible, providing enough food to sustain her, her son, and Elijah for the remainder of the famine. This miracle was not just about physical sustenance, but also about the spiritual awakening of the widow and a testimony to God's boundless provision. The story carries several layers of meaning. First, it underscores the theme of God's power and provision even in the most unlikely places. Zarephath, a pagan city, became the stage for a divine miracle, showing that God's care is not confined by geography or religion. Second, it illustrates the transformative power of faith. The widow's initial reluctance gave way to trust, and her act of obedience unlocked God's blessings in her life. This theme resonates deeply, reminding us that even small steps of faith in difficult times can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Finally, Elijah's encounter with the widow highlights God's concern for the marginalized and vulnerable. Widows in ancient times were among the most destitute members of society, yet God chose to work through this widow, using her faith to accomplish his purposes. This story also prepared Elijah for the greater challenges ahead, as he witnessed firsthand the sustaining power of God through seemingly impossible circumstances. For modern readers, the widow's story serves as a powerful reminder of the rewards of faith and obedience, even when the odds seem stacked against us. It challenges us to trust in God's promises and to believe that He can provide in ways we cannot foresee. Elijah's presence in Zarephath and the miracle that followed continue to inspire hope, demonstrating that God's provision is never limited by our circumstances, but is always abundant for those who trust in Him. The miraculous revival of the widow's son by Elijah is a deeply moving story that captures the profound interplay of human grief, unwavering faith, and divine power. This poignant moment occurred after the widow of Zarephath, who had experienced God's miraculous provision through Elijah, was struck by a devastating tragedy, the sudden death of her only son. This loss plunged her into immense sorrow and confusion. Overwhelmed by grief, she turned to Elijah, questioning why he had come into her life. Her words expressed both her anguish and a sense of guilt, as though Elijah's presence had somehow brought judgment upon her household. Elijah's response to her distress was one of compassion and action. Taking the lifeless boy from her arms, he carried him to the upper room where he had been staying, a private place of prayer and communion with God. There, Elijah laid the boy on his bed and cried out to the Lord with heartfelt desperation, asking, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" His prayer revealed not only his deep empathy for the widow's plight, but also his reliance on God's power to bring about restoration. In a powerful act of intercession, Elijah stretched himself out over the boy 3 times, each time crying out to God to return the child's life. This symbolic act of faith and fervent prayer demonstrated Elijah's belief in God's ability to defy death and bring new life. After his earnest plea, God responded, and the boy's life was restored. The once lifeless child began to breathe again, a miraculous moment that underscored God's sovereignty over life and death. Elijah then carried the boy back downstairs and returned him to his mother, proclaiming, "Look, your son is alive." This moment of reunion was not just a return to joy for the grieving mother, but also a turning point in her faith. Overcome with gratitude and awe, the widow declared, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Her acknowledgement of Elijah as a true prophet marked a profound spiritual transformation, as she came to recognize God's power and presence in her life. This extraordinary event is rich with themes that resonate deeply. It highlights the transformative power of prayer, showing how Elijah's heartfelt petitions to God led to a miraculous intervention. It also emphasizes God's compassion, as he responded to the widow's despair by restoring her son's life. Furthermore, it reveals the purpose of divine miracles, to deepen faith and demonstrate God's authority over all creation. The story also serves as a foreshadowing of God's ultimate power over death, pointing to future moments in biblical history where life would triumph over death through divine intervention. For believers today, the revival of the widow's son is a powerful reminder that God's presence is closest in moments of deepest despair. It encourages faith in God's ability to bring hope and restoration, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable loss. Through Elijah's faith, compassion, and reliance on God, this story continues to inspire trust in God's unwavering power to transform sorrow into joy and despair into renewed faith. Elijah's return to confront King Ahab after the drought marked a dramatic and pivotal moment in the history of ancient Israel, a nation reeling under the weight of a devastating famine. The drought, a direct consequence of Ahab's idolatry and the nation's abandonment of God, had brought Samaria to its knees. Crops had failed, water sources had dried up, and people and livestock were on the brink of starvation. The crisis exposed the futility of Baal worship, as the supposed god of rain and fertility was powerless to intervene. This national catastrophe set the stage for a confrontation that would challenge the spiritual direction of Israel. Amidst this dire situation, a loyal servant of King Ahab named Obadiah emerged as a figure of quiet heroism. Though he served under an idolatrous king, Obadiah remained faithful to the Lord. Risking his life, he secretly protected 100 prophets of the Lord by hiding them in 2 caves, providing them with food and water during Jezebel's relentless campaign to eliminate true worship in Israel. Obadiah's courage and commitment ensured the survival of God's prophets during one of the darkest periods in Israel's spiritual history, preserving a remnant of faith amidst widespread apostasy. As the famine worsened, Ahab, desperate to save what remained of his livestock, enlisted Obadiah to help search for grass and water. Their journey symbolized the king's misplaced priorities, focusing on the survival of animals while ignoring the spiritual drought that had brought about the physical one. During this search, Obadiah unexpectedly encountered Elijah, the very prophet who had declared the drought 3 years earlier. This meeting filled Obadiah with fear, knowing the danger Elijah faced from Ahab and Jezebel. Yet, Elijah instructed Obadiah to inform the king of his presence, signaling the prophet's readiness to confront Ahab once again. When Elijah and Ahab finally met, the tension was palpable. Ahab, frustrated and desperate, accused Elijah of being the troubler of Israel, blaming him for the drought. But Elijah boldly turned the accusation back on Ahab, declaring that the real cause of Israel's suffering was the king's disobedience and the nation's idolatry. Elijah's words were a call to accountability, forcing Ahab to confront the spiritual rebellion that had brought about the famine. This confrontation was not just a clash of personalities, but a decisive moment that would lead to a dramatic test of faith. Elijah proposed a challenge that would culminate in a spectacular showdown on Mount Carmel between the prophets of Baal and the true God of Israel. This encounter would not only expose the powerlessness of Baal, but also reaffirm God's sovereignty and call the people of Israel back to true worship. It was a moment of reckoning, one that would reshape the spiritual identity of the nation. This part of Elijah's story highlights critical themes of faith, courage, and divine justice. Obadiah's quiet resistance and Elijah's bold confrontation underscore the importance of standing firm in faith, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The encounter between Elijah and Ahab is a powerful reminder that disobedience to God carries consequences, but it also offers hope for restoration through repentance. For modern readers, this story serves as a call to examine their own lives, recognize the consequences of misplaced priorities, and embrace the transformative power of returning to God. The dramatic showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel is one of the most electrifying moments in the Bible, showcasing the unrivaled power of God and the courage of a prophet willing to stand alone for truth. This confrontation was more than a test of faith. It was a decisive moment in Israel's history, challenging the nation to choose between the false gods of Baal and the one true God. Elijah, emboldened by his unwavering trust in God, proposed a challenge to the 450 prophets of Baal and the people of Israel. He called for a public contest to demonstrate which deity was truly divine. The terms were simple. Both sides would prepare a bull for sacrifice and call upon their respective gods to send fire from heaven to consume the offering. The God who answered with fire would be recognized as the true God. The prophets of Baal eagerly accepted, confident in their deity's power. From morning until noon, they cried out to Baal, performing elaborate rituals, dancing frantically, and shouting with increasing desperation. Despite their efforts, the heavens remained silent. Elijah watched their futile attempts and at noon began to mock them, suggesting that Baal might be sleeping, busy, or on a journey. His taunts exposed the impotence of their false god and highlighted the futility of idol worship. As the day wore on, the prophets of Baal became more desperate. They resorted to self-mutilation, cutting themselves until they bled, hoping to invoke a response. Yet their cries were met with nothing but silence, underscoring the emptiness of their faith. The scene was a stark contrast to what would come next. When it was Elijah's turn, he approached the altar of the Lord with calm confidence. He repaired the altar, which had been neglected and broken down, symbolizing the spiritual decay of Israel. To make the task even more challenging and to leave no room for doubt, Elijah ordered the sacrifice and the wood to be drenched with water, not once, but 3 times, until the trench around the altar was filled with water. This act emphasized the impossibility of human intervention and set the stage for a miracle that only God could perform. Elijah then stepped forward and prayed a simple yet profound prayer. He invoked the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, asking him to reveal his power and turn the hearts of the people back to him. There was no need for shouting, dancing, or theatrics, just a heartfelt appeal to the one true God. In an instant, fire fell from heaven in a breathtaking display of divine power. The fire consumed not only the sacrifice, but also the wood, the stones of the altar, the dust, and even the water in the trench. This miraculous event was undeniable proof of God's supremacy. Then people of Israel fell to the ground in awe, crying out, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" This moment was a turning point, as it decisively exposed the falsehood of Baal worship and reaffirmed the sovereignty of the God of Israel. It was a call to repentance for a nation that had strayed from its covenant with God. For Elijah, it was a vindication of his faith and a powerful demonstration of the God he served. The Mount Carmel showdown resonates deeply even today, reminding believers of the importance of standing firm in faith, even when outnumbered or opposed. It challenges us to confront the false gods in our lives, those things we rely on that ultimately cannot deliver, and to place our trust in the one true God, whose power and presence are unmatched. Elijah's courage, faith, and reliance on God's authority continue to inspire, proving that even one person standing with God can bring about transformative change. The moment illustrates the power of faith and the importance of standing firm against spiritual corruption, ultimately shaping the course of Israel's relationship with God for generations to come. After the dramatic confrontation on Mount Carmel, Elijah turned his attention to a dire need that had plagued Israel for years: the absence of rain. The devastating drought, a direct consequence of the nation's idolatry, had left the land parched and the people desperate. Now that the prophets of Baal had been defeated and the people had acknowledged the Lord as the true God, Elijah sought to bring the long-awaited rain back to the land as a sign of God's mercy and faithfulness. With steadfast faith, Elijah climbed to the summit of Mount Carmel, where he knelt in prayer before God. His posture was one of deep humility and reverence, symbolizing his total dependence on God. Elijah's prayer was not casual or fleeting. It was fervent, persistent, and filled with faith. He knew that the God who had answered with fire could also answer with rain. This moment wasn't just about physical relief. It was about restoring the nation's faith in God's ability to provide. As Elijah prayed, he sent his servant to look toward the sea for any sign of rain. Time and again, the servant returned with the same disappointing report: "There is nothing." Yet Elijah was undeterred. His perseverance in prayer is a powerful lesson in faith, showing that even when answers are delayed, we must remain steadfast and trust in God's timing. Elijah's unwavering belief demonstrated that faith isn't about seeing immediate results, but about trusting in God's promises, even when the evidence isn't yet visible. Finally, on the 7th trip, the servant brought back news. a tiny cloud, no bigger than a man's hand, was rising from the sea. For anyone else, this might have seemed insignificant, but for Elijah, it was the confirmation he had been waiting for. This small cloud carried a message of hope and assurance. Elijah's faith turned immediately to action. He instructed his servant to go to King Ahab and warn him to prepare his chariot and hurry down the mountain before the rain overtook him. As Elijah descended Mount Carmel, the sky began to shift dramatically. The once clear sky grew dark with storm clouds, the wind began to howl, and the unmistakable scent of rain filled the air. Moments later, the heavens opened, and a torrential downpour swept across the land. The long-awaited rain brought life back to the dry and barren earth, fulfilling God's promise and symbolizing His mercy toward His people. This event is rich with profound lessons. Elijah's persistence in prayer teaches us the importance of faith, even when results aren't immediate. His readiness to act on the smallest sign of God's work reminds us to trust in God's process, no matter how small the beginnings may seem. The arrival of rain after such a long drought was more than a meteorological event. It was a spiritual awakening for the people of Israel, a vivid demonstration of God's power, and a reminder of His readiness to forgive and restore. For modern readers, this story serves as a powerful reminder of the effectiveness of prayer and the faithfulness of God. It challenges us to remain persistent in our own prayers, trusting that even the smallest signs can lead to transformative breakthroughs. Elijah's experience on Mount Carmel inspires us to believe in a God who not only hears, but also answers, bringing hope, restoration, and life in the most unexpected ways. Elijah's story is an extraordinary journey of faith, courage, and divine intervention, marked by moments that highlight his unique role as a prophet of God. From standing boldly before King Ahab to declaring a drought, to his dramatic victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, Elijah's life exemplifies unwavering obedience and trust in God's power. His encounters, such as reviving the widow's son and praying persistently for rain after a prolonged drought, demonstrate both the miraculous and the deeply human elements of his faith journey. Elijah's story is not just a series of miraculous events, but a profound testament to the themes of trust, perseverance, and God's unchanging faithfulness. His life challenges us to confront idolatry in our own lives, persevere in prayer when answers seem delayed, and rely on God's provision even in the most challenging circumstances. Elijah's unwavering obedience, even when faced with danger and despair, serves as a model for anyone seeking to walk in faith. As we reflect on Elijah's remarkable journey, his story encourages us to examine our own spiritual lives. Are we willing to stand firm in our beliefs, even when it's unpopular? Do we trust in God's promises, even when the evidence is unseen? Elijah's life reminds us that God's power is never limited, and His plans for us are always good. If this exploration of Elijah's life has inspired you, we encourage you to engage further with this message. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with others who may find encouragement and strength in these timeless lessons of faith. Together, we can continue to learn from these stories, deepen our understanding, and grow in our commitment to follow God wholeheartedly. Thank you for joining us on this journey of faith and discovery. Let's continue to walk forward with courage, just as Elijah did.